gaffes are as familiar to Joe Biden as maybe shamrocks are to Ireland. I mean, he's famous for his gaffes.
Hello and welcome to Off Script. My name is Stephen Edginton. Where does Joe Biden rank among the US presidents? I'm joined by Alvin Felzenberg, a presidential historian who has written a book ranking all of America's leaders, to discuss Biden's presidency in its historical context. Thank you, Alvin, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
Where does Joe Biden rank among the US presidents?
Well, it's a little early. We have to see how many things go. We don't know how Ukraine's going to go. I do think historians are going to give him credit for rising to that moment. I must say, he surprised me. And I think he broke a lot of eggs in his own party to do that. I think the anti-war movement of the Democratic Party was probably as strong, if not stronger, than it is in the Republican Party. But he's holding his ground. Joe Biden was a Cold War Democrat. He chaired the Foreign Relations Committee for many years. I do think there's something about him on this issue where politics stop at the water's edge. I think the same thing would be true with his stance toward Taiwan. I think he's been very vigorous. We don't know if we're going to go into a recession or not. I would say that his economic policies, at least by my lights, are not as strong, not as visionary as some of the things he's done on the international stage. But we'll see. I've been hearing reports in Britain now about interest rates going up. Are we going to have the recession or not? Is it better to get it over with earlier or not? The longer we wait, will it be deeper or more shallow? These are all open questions. The same thing's true of his infrastructure program. It's something he was very, very proud of. I don't hear that many people talking about it in the United States. And you might remember when Obama once said that a lot of the projects that were shovel-ready were not shovel-ready when they actually got out to do the work. We'll see if they're all waiting for environmental impact statements or approvals and are going to take 90 years to finish a bridge and these kind of things. Presidents should have empathy. That's been one of his strong suits. We've had a lot to be empathetic about. Just in the last 10, 15 years, we've had the 9/11 attacks. We had people thrown out of work in the worst economic decline since the Great Depression. We now have doubts about our ability to solve problems and achieve much anything. We have a growing group of people who felt the government wasn't listening to them. They'd been left out of all these trade agreements that perhaps were oversold and overpromised, not just NAFTA, but a whole number of them. So right now, an incomplete with a couple of good grades on the foreign side and a lot of question marks.
So I'm going to give you some of the darker marks of his presidency.
Please, yes.
Some people would argue that he is not a unifying president. He's very divisive in his rhetoric, particularly when he talks about the extreme MAGA Republicans. Now, is this a unifying thing when you're trying to... He promised basically to bring America together after the Trump presidency, and I don't think that America's been more divided than in a long time.
I would agree with you to a point. I don't think that's a unifying issue to attack people who didn't vote for you. We're back to the Hillary Clinton, 1/3 were deplorables, is not a way to unify the country. That said, he's probably followed the most of his predecessor in American history. Most other people who ran for president believed in abiding by the results. This is the first time he has a new standard if he thinks he was treated fairly, and he cannot believe that an honest election would go against him. Most of his attacks are against other people in the United States government, a lot more. He said nicer things about Putin than he said about most of the United States Senate, most of Congress, and probably any governor, particularly the governor of Florida, now that he's having some competition with him. He said nicer things about Putin, nicer things about Xi. And Biden's responding to that. Now, a president should be bigger than that. I would agree with you. He should talk about the things that we have in common and not the things that divide us. I think both of these gentlemen, if we're going to have the rematch nobody seems to want, have to learn that to get over the finish line, they need to get more than their base. Their base is not enough. There are certain elements in the presidential office that do lend toward unity in some ways, and I don't think either of them match that.
People saw Joe Biden as a fairly moderate figure.
He was.
Yes. But I think that's changed in recent years, and one could make an argument that he's been more on the left of the Democratic Party, more of a radical president. Could you compare him to perhaps other Democrats who've been president in terms of his radicalism and his socialism?
Well, I think you're right, and that's where I make the parallel to the base. I mean, Biden has run for president now 3 times. He was carried over the finish line when other Democrats decided that Bernie Sanders might be too much and might panic the electorate. So if you recall, he didn't do well in the early primaries. The only thing he won was South Carolina when the Congressman Jim Clyburn from the state galvanized the African-American vote, and they put significant persuasion, if not pressure, on Klobuchar and Buttigieg and some others to withdraw. So the only one left. He was a moderate in the United States Senate. He was a centrist Democrat, a John F. Kennedy Cold War Democrat, with a touch of Franklin Roosevelt's and Harry Truman's appeal to organized labor. There's no question that progressives have been running the show. We see it with appointments. We see it with climate change. We've seen a certain fixation on certain refusals to compromise and move toward the middle in any way.
Do you think, compared to Franklin Roosevelt and other Democrat presidents, I mean, where would you put Biden if you had Roosevelt on the very left and Johnson on the left, and you sort of had the more Bill Clinton sort of on the right? Where does Joe Biden?
Well, let me say one thing in defense of Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson, something I don't always do in my book. I mean, I think they're very successful, but the times were much more liberal then. You had 25% of the country out of work in 1932. There was a tremendous sense that the international banking community had collapsed. His inaugural America Needs Action now. He won 4 landslides. And in those days, the center of the Democratic Party, maybe because of Franklin Roosevelt, maybe because of the Depression, was a lot more left than it is now. Lyndon Johnson, yes, he gave us more entitlements than any president since Franklin Roosevelt. He upped spending in every area. He also tried to finish the work of the civil rights movement, or at least what I call the work of the Civil War. We ended the Civil War, and we never really extended to African Americans the full promise of America. When Mrs. Thatcher stepped down from her leadership post as Prime Minister, she came to the United States. She gave a remarkable speech to the Heritage Foundation. She said that you Americans don't realize the gift you've given the world. You're the only country that I can identify that was founded around an idea, that all people are equal in the eyes of each other, in the eyes of God, and in the eyes of the law. You know how radical that was? We're all the products of conquest and heritage and history. And she said, you freed people you didn't intend to. She said, you know how many people were voting in 1789 or 1776 when you started all this ruckus about taxes and votings and taxation without representation? How many people in Britain were voting? They did because of you. They waited until 1832. Well, in the case of Lyndon Johnson, they waited a very long time. We told the world about equality. Lyndon Johnson did it. But I would point out to you that he passed it with very wide majorities. I mean, there were 36 Republican senators at that time in a House and a Senate of 100. And he got 29 out of 36. I mean, there was very little division about this. He passed these controversial, in Medicare, same thing. These, what we now say were controversial bills, huge margins. What Joe Biden is talking about now is trying to cherry pick off 3 Republican congressmen, if you can find them, from the Republican conference, and just pass it by 1, 2, 3 votes. That's not the way Johnson ran it. That's not the way Roosevelt ran it. There is a center. Every political scientist I know say the American people are not as divided as their leaders, who are now scheming to keep them divided to be the first past the post. And I think a good reading of American history might convince the White House to try another route, another strategy.
Historically, presidents have been more friendly, as you say, to their rivals. And you could go back to the early republic, where you have, genuine relationships between the leaders of the 2 different parties. Now, I can't imagine Donald Trump and Joe Biden getting together and having a coffee or a dinner or a lunch or something, and much good coming from it. So do you think that just more generally, American politics has become more divided, and how much can we blame Joe Biden on that?
Well, I would remind you the early days were also pretty rambunctious. We did have a duel. I mean, we know how the musical Hamilton really ended, and we know some of the schemes and blackmail and other attempts that Jefferson and Hamilton tried to do to destroy each other. But 1940 was a very divisive election. No president ran for a 3rd term before. There was a great debate in the United States about whether the American people would stay isolationist or whether they would provide aid to Britain. And Wendell Willkie campaigned as a warmonger, called Franklin Roosevelt. He didn't campaign as a warmonger. He said Roosevelt was a warmonger. A vote for him means war is certain. And he also called him a dictator for trying to run for a third term, which no one had ever done.
So this is the Republican rival to Roosevelt?
Yes, he was an internationalist, but he was considered a little more moderate than the outright isolationists who were supporting Charles Lindbergh and taking the view that we've gotten very little out of the First World War, except military cemeteries, unfortunately. They've had a chance to clean up their act, and we shouldn't do it a second time. He was passed over for Willkie. We can talk about this. But 10 days after the election, I just said it was a very divisive election, Franklin Roosevelt sends Wendell Willkie to Winston Churchill. And they're now talking about Lend-Lease. They're talking about what would the alliance be, and Churchill responds to Willkie, what do I tell this thrice elected leader of the largest English-speaking country in the world? I say, give us the tools, we'll do the job. And Willkie did that all through the war. When Harry Truman passed the Marshall Plan, it was with tremendous Republican support. He had the Congress for the first year or two, and then he lost Congress to the Republicans. He brought the chairman in of the important committees, and they did it together. They changed the plan to accommodate some Republican objections. They named some people that Harry Truman probably never would have wanted anything in his life, but he wanted the program. He even named it after somebody else, not himself, because he thought George Marshall was more popular than he was. Okay, we haven't seen much of that lately. And it would be a good thing if Biden would do that. But I would point something out. You mentioned division. Remember Ronald Reagan's inaugural address? I'm looking out at this crowd and I see heroes. Remember Donald Trump. I look out in this crowd and I see carnage. Every living former president except Jimmy Carter, who was ill that day, was on the stand. Clinton was on the stand. Hillary was on the stand. She was not a president. She was on the stand with her husband. Both Bushes were on the stand. I won't repeat what George Bush said about that inaugural. That was the time to reach out. When we had the transition of Obama yielding to Trump, it was one of the most gracious and successful transitions in history, both sides said. Donald Trump left the White House and said, you know, I really think Obama liked me. We had no transition last time. It was a question of would he leave? No one ever tried that before. So, I mean, I have to say, I'm not playing a blame game, but there's enough on both sides. It would be nice if a former president could say something about any other president that he supported.
Well, Joe Biden is the president, of
yes,
course,
he is
and
the president.
We must test him on his record.
Yes, correct.
And he was the man in his inaugural address who said that he was going to unite the nation.
Yes.
And I think if you measure him on any metric, he has totally failed on that.
He should be held to that. He should be held accountable for that.
So how can you say, you know, so let's say that, I know that we're only 2 and a bit years into his presidency, and you've written this fantastic book about, you know, ranking all of the presidents. Can we say, do we have any idea of, you know, is he middle, is he low, is he high? I mean, where would you put him vaguely?
Well, he was in one of my classes. I'd give him an incomplete. We don't know where the economy's going. We don't know how long we're going to stay committed to Ukraine. We don't know what's going to happen with this offensive. And again, a lot of bills, if we default on our debt, there's no question that he will get out as a failed president. There's no question about that. If we say the United States does not stand by its commitment, we will see, I think, more than a recession. Let's see how it comes out. Let's see what both sides can take to the table and call a victory.
Joe Biden's approval ratings are very low if you compare to other presidents.
Correct.
They are extremely low.
Correct.
And you can pinpoint this where his approval ratings went sort of dipped like this. And this was the Afghanistan. This was the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
That was the low point. I should have mentioned it earlier. The low point, and took no accountability for that. He gave a major speech saying this would not be a repeat of Vietnam, with people running to the roofs of the embassies, pulling to the feet of people above them trying to get on a helicopter. They had time. They picked the day of the withdrawal. I don't think it convinced many people to say that it was the date Trump picked. I don't think that was very helpful. And not leaving people behind used to be a great American value, and he should be held accountable for that. But 35% approval. Remember that a poll is a snapshot in time. We don't know what people are going to think if these other things I talked about are worked out in a very positive way. We don't know who he's going to run against. I think we know. It's not clear yet. Being a front runner is a very bad position that somebody should go into 6 months or a year before the convention. Ask George Romney that. Ask Jeb Bush that. There are so many people in history, the front runner just sort of never made it. And sometimes you want somebody else to be the surprise candidate. And if somebody else were the front runner and Trump did have come back, we'd have a different situation. So we'll see.
I mean, so the fact is he's been divisive. The economy is struggling.
Yes.
Afghanistan was a disaster. And there are some people who say that Joe Biden will be the president remembered for being the one who ended the American empire, or was at least president when the American empire lost its supremacy against other countries like China. I mean, I'll give you a good example of that, other than Afghanistan, is the US currency. And there's many, the BRICS countries are talking about forming their own currency alliance, and the dollar will no longer be the currency of reserve. Right. And that's just one example of where America is losing its hegemony and losing its influence on the world stage. So this could be something else that Joe Biden's perhaps judged on.
Well, again, it's an open story. I hope Joe Biden's reading those papers. This is the time to take on the far left and his own party. If the United States dollar no longer becomes the means of exchange that everybody else wants, still is right now, they're waiting to see how we're going to get our budget under control. I can't even remember how much we spent on COVID. Fortunately, we didn't need all the money we spent. Some of it's still being spent. One of the talking points now with the debt reduction argument, it's time we return some of that to the American people. And it's time we cut some taxes of people who've been straining very, very hard. No doubt about that. However, I would tell you that just 2 days ago, Trump was interviewed on a town meeting on CNN. And he said, it's about time we repudiated the debt. It's the only way to get rid of this once and for all. Now, can you imagine what would happen if we said we're not going to pay our debts to any of the nations, including to China? How that's going to further world peace. So again, incomplete. When I wrote the book, you were kind enough to mention, I exempted George Bush in the first edition. I said, you really have to go out of office. Not for 20 years, as we used to say about Truman and Ike, but at least 5. Let's see how it's playing out. And I don't know if George Bush's numbers have gone up or down. I suspect down a bit. On some of the matters, I think Clinton may be going up a bit and down a bit. And even Mr. Nixon, his great vision, his great ability to turn the tables. I don't know how good that China opening looks now. Not that we want to stay closed, but the right questions were not asked. I mean, what is rule of law? What is rule of contract? Why do we think they're going to keep their agreements? And there was this bazaar of American companies as they couldn't wait to compete to get into China and these joint venture operations, and now they can't wait to get out. So I don't know how that looks. So the presidents go up and down, and maybe I should end with one of my favorites, is the U.S. Grant. I mean, he was rated one of the worst presidents for about 100 years, or even more. And yet we start looking at the first Reconstruction opportunities that were missed the first time around, and he doesn't look so bad at all. So, I mean, things will happen. That will happen to Biden, that will happen to Trump, that will happen to Bush. There are some things that the Trump administration showed great courage and great vision on. I don't know why he doesn't take credit for the vaccine. He had another chance last night. He picked the company. He set the deadline. We never hear about it. Now, does that mean that there are too many people in his base that are against vaccinations or against compulsory vaccinations or taking positions that the governor of Florida is taking? He doesn't want to antagonize. That's going to go down as one of the great things in history. As we say about Bush, if you want to look at the end of Bush, the program he did to combat AIDS in Africa, children born with AIDS, it was a miraculous program. He goes every year. We never hear about it. So there are certain things that when they open the presidential files, we're going to know that we didn't talk about at the time.
I mean, we know at the moment there's a crisis on the American border, and millions and millions of people have entered the US under Biden. I mean, this recent Title 42 event has happened where he's kind of relaxed the rules on COVID as well. So this is another instance where you see, I think that is a failure of Biden's presidency, and crime is another one where crime is increased.
I can agree with you, but again, we're going to have a referendum, and unfortunately, a referendum of 2 people who are not all that popular as president. And people are still asking what happened to the wall, why he didn't push the wall when he had both houses of Congress, why somehow things that he made a priority and as a presidential candidate fell out of the list. I don't know why, but if they debate, You told me that Trump said the other night, I missed that he may not debate in August. If they debate head-to-head, it'd be interesting to see what the response would be when Joe says, where was the wall? I think the approach to immigration right now has just been horrendous in my country. It's almost getting to an emergency status. There's question in the House, even among Democrats, about whether the head of the INS, the International Helping Out Naturalization Authority, whether he should be impeached. There certainly will be hearings about this. And we sent the vice president down, and she said we don't have a border crisis. Tell that to any American driving a taxi today that we don't have a border crisis. Or any big city in the United States, we don't have a border crisis.
America is facing a series of challenges, the border being one of them. You could argue the rise of AI is a major challenge to all countries, particularly the United States, who is at the forefront of Silicon Valley in developing this technology. Also, as you mentioned before, the rise of China. And you have Donald Trump and Joe Biden, who are both fairly old candidates. And that's one thing we haven't talked about is Biden's age. And this is something he's been committing a lot of gaffes. And perhaps you could talk a bit about his age.
Well, first of all, gaffes are as familiar to Joe Biden as maybe shamrocks are to Ireland. I mean, he's famous for his gaffes. There was a time, if you remember, the Obama inauguration. There was a slip. The Chief Justice had not presided over inauguration before, and he reversed the order of a few words. There was a big question. Could somebody challenge whether Obama was sworn in? So they had it again at the White House. And Joe Biden was supposed to introduce the Chief Justice and the President and redo this again. He started by repeating all the mistakes the Chief Justice did, and Obama finally grabbed him by the elbow and pulled Joe off the podium. So mistakes we know. Age, well, again, looking good for a man 82 right now, or 80, going to be 82 when he runs. Trump is not that much younger. I think he's probably better physical shape, but I haven't seen any of their medical records. People are still debating, did Ronald Reagan have any signs of Alzheimer's in his last couple of years? Some people met with him, swore he did. And I challenge those people to go look at the final year with Gorbachev and look at the arm bending he did to the INF Treaty to get it to the United States Senate, where we abolished the entire family of nuclear weapons. No man could have done the work he did with Gorbachev and Thatcher and not had all his marbles. I don't care what they're saying. I'm not saying Biden is not slipping with age. Let me just say, when you elect an 82-year-old man who's going to be 86 at the end of his tenure, you can't say that his best years are ahead of him. And you can't say he's going to grow very much, which you can say about a younger man. I mean, an Obama, a Kennedy, a Clinton, and maybe even a DeSantis. There's more hope to grow if there's a higher learning curve. There's more possibility to learn from your mistakes and not repeat them. And that's something I would worry about with both of them. Are we getting anything new with Trump, or is it going to be 4 years of retribution and payback time? Well, sometimes people are tired of payback time, and the question will be, what are you doing for us? Yes, we support you. We sympathize with you. You have a great set of grievances. You've been picked on. You've been ganged up. Okay, but what about us? What do we get in the 4 years? We've stuck steady with you. And maybe it's time to get your ideas on the table and get another candidate to sell them. I don't know. That's why we have primary elections. That's why we have debates. And that's why we have elections.
Now, Joe Biden, he is so old that he was in the Senate in the 1970s.
Yes,
I think that's when
the one job he's ever had, really, the one full-time job he's had. He's elected in 1972.
And there's this famous quote that can be attributed to Napoleon. You can judge a man on what happened when he was 20 in the world.
Yes.
And
yes.
Can we apply that to Joe Biden? I mean, does the legacy of his kind of early adulthood impact his current decisions?
Well, I've heard him speak on this at a town meeting in South Carolina when he failed to get the nomination against Obama and other candidates running. He's talking about the world when he was 20. John Kennedy was in the White House. He said, why do I run for president? Because a young president asked me to do something. A young president asked me to serve. A young president asked me to make things better. A young president managed the Cold War with great panache, averted nuclear war, educated more children, created what we now know as the civil rights response of the president. John Kennedy was the first president to call civil rights a moral issue. That was the world when Joe Biden was growing up. And I'm surprised we haven't seen more of the idealism, but that were the times he was growing up. His world is the Democratic Party, and in his day when he was growing up, the political bosses ran the Democratic Party. It was a very strong party. It was a majority party. Whenever Republicans would win, they would call them deviating elections because both Eisenhower and Nixon won great landslides with Democratic Congresses. Ike in 56, and had the Senate and the House for 2 years at 52, and 6 years of Democratic Congress. Nixon the whole time, Democratic Congress. So there were deviating elections because the Democrats were so strong at the bottom. The clubhouse, the mayors, the governors, they ran the Democratic Party. The party system has fallen apart. If you were going to come with me to a meeting of Democrats and hear them grousing in the halls, we really want somebody else, really want somebody, well, what are you going to do about it? The presidents have sort of, within the nominating process, the presidential nominee has made themselves the king. You oppose him, a lot of other things may happen to you in your own renomination. It's true of both sides. And so this started with Roosevelt. He wanted a third term, and the former vice president wouldn't run with him, or wasn't even talking to him because he wanted to be president. And the man who he picked in 1940 was too radical for the bosses. They had a meeting with Franklin Roosevelt, and they said, quote, "That will remind you of your question about Biden. You know, Frank, you don't look very good. You don't look very healthy. Most people think we're electing two presidents this time. We cannot sell Henry Wallace in the wars. He's too pro-Stalin. Yeah, I know we're allies of convenience, but he's too pro-Stalin. We have Ukrainians in the state of Illinois, in the city of Chicago. We have Poles. We have other people he's massacred. We cannot deliver Illinois for you." They forced him in the middle of a war to drop a vice president in that way, and he picked Harry Truman, who was no problem, as it turned out, in the Cold War, and was the first one to strand Hall. Well, I don't think we can do that. Even Biden's staff is leaking certain things about the vice president, and yet whatever Joe says goes because he doesn't want to set some rumbling effects in the party. We strengthen the parties. This is one thing I admire so much about your country. Yes, you've had strong prime ministers, but even Mrs. Thatcher, I thought it was a tragedy and a disgrace that she was brought to heel by her own party, that she led to victory 3 times, but still they had the ultimate say over who would be their leader. And right now we have the primary system. 13% of registered Republicans, registered Democrats vote in the primary in their states. New Hampshire's a good place to watch. Maybe it'll be a little higher this year. Who knows? Of that 13%, I would say a majority of them are the fringe groups of both sides. They're the base, progressive base, and they're whatever Biden wants to call Trump's base. And they wonder why people are turned off, and wonder why the political scientists say that the public is not as polarized as the parties, as the leaders are. I would like to make that change. If God came down and said, give me one change, I would strengthen the parties at the expense of the presidential candidate and rebuild the institution that wants great political parties.
So do you think historically Joe Biden basically would have had no chance of becoming the Democratic candidate for president?
Historically? Well, we have the record. We have, in 1988, he ran for president against a fellow named Michael Dukakis. You might remember Michael Dukakis. Nobody does, really. George Bush, the first, buried him in one of the largest landslides we've had. Well, Biden in the primary gave a speech that was basically lifted from Neil Kinnock, who was running against Thatcher. I don't know why that was the role model, because Neil Kinnock lost one of the largest margins in British history. And he actually, without changing the script, and he was not 80 years old then, without changing the script, he reads that, you know, I used to get up every morning with my father and go into the mines. Maybe he kept the line too about in Wales. I don't know. So he had a chance at that point, and he was passed over. He was one of the last ones standing the year Obama ran, and you know, when it was clear that Obama was going to emerge. And I guess they polled this. Axelrod had focus groups work. Axelrod was Biden's political consultant. And I suppose those polls showed that he cost less than running with anyone else. Anyone else would have been more divisive. Anyone else they probably couldn't control as much. And they picked Joe Biden because he could do no harm. Nixon once said that about a vice president: he can only hurt you, he can't help you. Looking across the street, seeing John McCain running with Sarah Palin, looked like a smart move. So yes, history has shown that he was never the Democrats' favorite. But nevertheless, they settled on him and he won.
Do you think he won by default in 2020?
Yes. I think that was one of the elections that more people opposed the other candidate than supported Joe Biden. I never detected a great deal of affection for him. But that was also true with Lyndon Johnson. I mean, Lyndon Johnson ran on John Kennedy's record. I praised Johnson before, but he was going to bring in the ship that this fallen captain had left us. But there was no affection for him. There was always Bobby Kennedy waiting in the wings. There were other Democrats who were younger, who were looking forward to the future, give better speeches. But this has happened on other occasions.
If you were writing a Robert Caro-style million-volume biography of Biden's life, very long life, right, what do you think the narrative arc would be?
Loyalty, waiting one's turn, doing one's duty. He wasted, he spent a good part of his life, I said wasted, I wouldn't say that again, spent a lot of his life trying to plot his next move. And it seems like it's the next step. He was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, an important job. He was chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House, an important job. Vice President of the United States. I mean, it's the obvious next step. Now, maybe he would have run earlier had his son not passed away tragically. And it was an emotional trauma for the family, and maybe he couldn't focus on that. Maybe Obama saw that. He played with it a bit. And Obama made it clear he thought Hillary would be the nominee, not that he was pushing her, but he thought she, which is the way of saying, Joe, I'd rather you not do it. And that's certainly understandable. But this was his last chance, and he wasn't going to let it pass without a fight. He surprised me that he didn't galvanize more Democratic voters, that even the base that he is so enamored with now, he was not their first choice. And if I had to look back on his presidency, he spent too much time in his first 2 years negotiating with his own base and not negotiating with the Republicans. And in the end of the day, the base has no choice but to fall in line. And he just let them get too much.
Who was the last great U.S. president?
Ronald Reagan, without question. And runner-up would be George Herbert Walker Bush. But there's no question Ronald Reagan was our last great president. He had the vision to see around corners. Other people would ask, the realpolitik approach of the Nixon years was balance of power. We negotiate for the sake of negotiating. Sometimes we're up, sometimes they're up. But in the end, peace is preserved, balance of power. Reagan could say, this is an evil empire. Can we conceive a world without it? And how do we get there? And he was hearing stories about shortages on the shelves and intelligence reports never reporting to him exactly how much they were spending on defense, a lot higher than we thought. And the more they spent on defense, the more cracks emerged in the civil society of Russia. That's why the shortages. And he realized that rhetoric mattered. He was overjoyed when he found out that his comments about evil empire made it into the Gulag. And his comment was, as I always said, the world wouldn't end if an American president told the truth about the Soviet Union. He had constancy, he had commitment, he had character. He understood the importance of compromise with the Democrats when it was necessary. We never had these discussions about are we going to default on our debt, and Ronald Reagan was president. He knew that much. And they came together. They came together on entitlement reform. It's the last time we really tackled Social Security, when he sat down with Tip O'Neill and they solved it for a generation. They can do it again if there's a willingness to do it. And he left an incredible legacy. There's a book I just reviewed by a professor at the University of Texas named William M. Bowden, and talked about how he did it. And I was quite impressed at how he worked with allies. He calls allies, Professor M. Bowden, multipliers. And sometimes you don't do it yourself. Sometimes you let Thatcher do it. Remember when Thatcher said that she could do business with Gorbachev? Well, let's try it out. Come brief me next week. I'm going to see him in 2 months. Let's see what you found. Same thing with Japan. Reagan understood the importance of Nixon's China opening, but was guarded of the euphoria that came from it. And he said, here's a nation. This is a man that never had any foreign policy experience, never worked for another president. He said, here's a country that opens toward the West and closes toward the West. They have periods of capitalism. They have periods of cultural revolution, often at the same time. We're going to hitch our wagon to a democracy in Asia that's going to lead the way to the future. It's going to put pressure on Korea to become a democracy, and eventually Taiwan becomes a democracy. And they've got this defense belt from Korea, Philippines, Japan, further south of Australia and New Zealand. We're already there. Now, because of that thinking, we have the capacity at least to make it harder for China to take Taiwan. Not impossible, harder. It's going to cost. And these nations are in some ways acting the way NATO has now responded toward Ukraine. He left Joe Biden something to work with if he's willing to grab it. That's vision, and that's seeing ahead. And that's what I would say about the last, great president.
Now, Clinton obviously was the one who let China into the WTO,
Yes.
which I think
Yes.
has had interesting
Yes.
and
Yes.
rather terrible consequences.
Yes.
Can Joe Biden be a great president?
He has the ability to, if you listen to this program.
If he listens to Alvin Felzenberg.
No, he listens to you. Steve, remember the name Steve Edginton? It's some very good questions. And I hate to say incomplete all the time or unfinished all the time.
I know, I'm trying to push you.
No. But if he listens to this show, he listens to your questions, and he grabs it, and he says, I'm now speaking toward the ages. I'm asking for a second term. I'm not speaking to my base. I don't have any internal opposition to the Democratic nomination. I really can do anything I want as mastermind, leader of the Democratic Party, from Biden's point of view, who kept the wolf at bay twice. Now I'm talking about the country. Now I'm talking about where I want America to be in the next 100 years. And I'm going to come up with an agenda for at least the first 50, even though I won't be here to see it. And if he got the financial, I wouldn't mention a banking crisis, we're going through one. If he got the banking community together and they stopped these go-go bailouts, the law says $250,000 in a bank account, the bank fails, the government will pay it, and they were lending a lot more than that. They were skating very close to the top, and banks have failed. We have a crisis in California, and it may spread. And if he can get that under control, if he can get the spending cut, if he can return some of the COVID money to deficit reduction, if he can work with the Speaker. By the way, McCarthy gets too little credit. Speaker McCarthy, he's Speaker of the House by 3 votes in the last election. The divided party on foreign policy, and he stayed tall. He stayed tall. There's nothing really in it for him with the MAGA voters who are going to support Trump, and maybe a lot of the MAGA voters support Ukraine also. Very complicated issue right now within the Republican Party. Biden never praises him. We talk about the importance for bipartisanship. We have a House Speaker and a House Chairman of Foreign Relations. His name is McCall. They've both done more to help Joe Biden than any Democrat I know on the Hill when it comes to foreign relations in Ukraine. And for God's sakes, at some point, turn it over to a new generation of leaders. And I don't only mean the vice president. You can look through the entire government. I mean, too many people are serving too long.
So Ronald Reagan was last president in 1989. And then obviously we had George H.W. Bush Sr., who was a very honourable man, and he presided over the end of the Cold War. Obviously, you could give the credit to Reagan, but obviously Bush was the guy who was there in the early 1990s, collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, obviously, we know that people blame his commitment to not increase taxes for the reason that he lost that election to Bill Clinton.
Well, his failure to keep the promise.
His failure to keep that promise. Absolutely, yeah. So he said, "Read my lips. I won't reduce taxes. I won't increase taxes." Yeah. So very honourable man, and then you can compare him to Bill Clinton, and perhaps there's a very stark sort of contrast in personalities. Do you think that Bill Clinton was really the beginning of the decline of the American stock in terms of presidents?
I don't know. I mean, Remember Bosnia and Kosovo? Remember the last time we had war crimes? And remember what happened to Mr. Milosevic and some of his henchmen? The United States said, we're going to lead the world with NATO, with our allies in the UK and other places. This will not stand. Serbia attacked no NATO country. The first time in NATO's history that they went together against a nation that did not offend anyone. They were on our side in World War II. But using rape as an instrument of war and murdering people simply because of who they were and violating the International Charter of Human Rights of the United Nations. Clinton galvanized that. It was not a world war, no, it was not U.S. versus USSR and any of that, but that would not have happened with Bill Clinton, without Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright. He was the first president to say that, you know, we have a special relationship with Britain, but we also care about what happens in Ireland. British soldiers are getting killed, too many of them. It's gone on for 30 years. It was going on from the time he was a student at Oxford. He was attacked for sticking his thumb into someone else's pie. It's held. I'm not telling you what Britain should do now. I mean, we have questions about the border and other things, but that wouldn't happen without Bill Clinton. The mistake with China was they were never held to account. Now we get to some ethical problems. There were allegations, some probably were true, that Chinese money seeping into the American electoral process. There are questions now about Russian money seeping in to other things going on in our political system. But for whatever reason, China got away with a lot with the WTO. It fed cynicism. I see that Britain is now joining the Pacific Trade Pact, something Trump said he would never join, and Biden said he would join, and that doesn't mention. WTO was a good idea, but it didn't have enough teeth, or at least it wasn't a commitment on his side to push it.
But Clinton made this claim at the time that by China joining the WTO, they would become a more liberal democracy.
Well,
and he has been proved completely wrong on that.
Nixon made the argument. You know, he was standing in China in the middle of a cultural revolution. People were still in the gulag. And he was asked, why are you not pushing human rights? And he said, within time, capitalism will democratize. This is a myth that too many presidents bought. They're communists. They believe in communism. Even their form of capitalism is communism. We have, in your country and in mine, we acknowledge there's a private sector, there's a public sector, and there should be free trade among free nations. They don't realize this. They have government runs business, government runs labor, government runs, obviously it runs government, it's science, it's everything. So we have a committee now in the United States Congress, also under McCarthy, it's run by Congressman Gallagher of Wisconsin. If they're going to make defense, diplomacy, and economics the same, three prongs of a same strategy, we're then going to treat them that way. So we're going to have a China committee, a select committee on China, and we're not going to let things that affect China come up through about 9 committees, and we don't talk to each other. Again, he should be praised for that. No, yeah, Clinton had a lot of faults. You just hit one. But so did Nixon, so did Ford, so did Carter.
But Clinton was the man who was happily to lie. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. You know, wasn't this degrading the office of the presidency?
You're changing stories on me. I said the Clinton questions about ethics come up, and lying is one of them. And he was found guilty by a couple of juries, and no longer has the right to practice law in New York or Arkansas. We visited that. And we were saying, I know there was several people in the Clinton administration left because they were tired of having breakfast with their 8-year-old, asking them about oral sex and whether it's sex. Or, Mommy, what is it, da-da-da-da-da, that appear in the Starr report about Clinton. All right. But even in the Clinton era, I don't think anybody would think that the President of the United States would be paying off porn queens and
he was accused of sexual. I mean, Clinton himself was accused of sexual assault.
Well, he was just found guilty by a jury of assaulting a woman. They didn't use the word rape. What's the defense for Stormy Daniels? That paying people off to keep quiet is not a crime. All right. In my world, I think it kind of is. And if we're going to have one standard for Clinton, I remember how what you would call tobacco base carried on about Clinton during impeachment. I remember the jokes on late night comedy and all of that. And to think that the Republican Party that has now become the party of religious fundamentalism and morality does not think there's a contradiction in that. I'll let others to talk about. But if we're going to talk about Clinton, it's hard not to talk about Trump.
But let's go back to this issue of great presidents. How often do we get a great president? I mean, it's been 30 years, what I'm saying, since Reagan. So is that unusual that we haven't had one since?
It's the longest stretch that I can think of where we haven't had one since. We had a series in a row at one point. I mean, we had whatever one thinks of Franklin Roosevelt, he did win the World War. He did bring down Nazi Germany. Maybe he left at the right time because he had blind spots about other parts of the world that Harry Truman did not. But I think it's fair to say that Roosevelt and Truman and Eisenhower were three in a row. We pass over Kennedy, but there were signs of growth, there were signs of change, there were signs of courage. And we talked about Johnson, who was not a great president, but those were four presidents in a row that I think you could say left a stronger legacy than the last four presidents, if I was going to do it that way. We have great sympathy and great respect for Jimmy Carter now. He's not a great president. He recognized China, and he was Mr. Human Rights. He wanted to make America. He said that we were spending too much time. We had an inordinate fear of communism. At the same time, we should walk away from allies because we didn't approve of everything we did on the human rights agenda. Did nothing to push them. Okay. Clinton should have done more in China. I've said this several times. Did Mao mistake Kissinger? Did he lead Kissinger on? How old was Mao at the time? Older than Biden, I suspect. So if we're questioning Biden's judgment, we really have to judge Mao.
We swam in that river, didn't we?
Well, we swam in that river. Mao knew we wanted out of Vietnam, and he knew why Kissinger was going. Kissinger was going because he wanted another wedge to push against the Soviet Union so they would put pressure on North Vietnam, and that both countries, China and Russia, would stop that. Well, that never happened. The war went on for 4 more years, or 3 more years after the China opening. It was an important defensive move. We shared intelligence with the Chinese about the movement of Soviet troops and many things. But I said, we're reassessing Nixon, and I think the China opening does not look in the light of today what it looked like then. The euphoria is gone. The gild is off the lily. We'll see.
And really, Kissinger was making this, he made this argument that we don't want China and Russia to be close because that will cause huge problems in terms of America's hegemony. And one could argue, and certainly people do argue in the United States, that this has been a complete failure of Joe Biden. By supporting Ukraine in the way that he has done, he's pushed Russia closer to China, and now Russia and China.
I don't
well, if you look at Chinese and Russian trade, I mean, it's massively increased. The sanctions have led to China basically propping up the Russian economy. So there is that argument that perhaps that is a failure of foreign policy.
I couldn't blame that on Joe Biden. We had Putin invades a country. China sees what some United States senators see. The country of Russia is a wasteland with a gas station, basically. China has outmaneuvered many nations before, the reason they have the oldest civilization. They realize that Putin's travails give them an opportunity to suborn China, I won't say into a Russian satellite, but be the dominant player. They're forcing themselves onto the international stage. They're into the Middle East. They will forever be in Putin's debt if he survives. If he doesn't survive, they will be very nice to whoever his successor is, who will be subordinate. I can't blame Joe Biden for that. I praise Biden for standing tall. He had an opponent, had an opponent at the time for the Republican nomination, governor of Florida, basically called Putin's war with Ukraine a territorial dispute. We can tell that to the Ukrainians, tell that to Americans of Ukrainian descent, tell that to any nation that saw a totalitarian country sweep Europe before. Does anybody think he's going to stop at Ukraine? I mean, tell it to the Finns, tell it to the Swedes. I give the president credit for things he does right, and that's one of the things he's done right, and history was very kind to him.
Do you agree with my general sentiment that there has been a decline of American presidents?
I do.
And why do you think that has been? What's your...
Our political system has gotten very, the American people have gotten very cynical. There's a lot to be cynical about. All of these presidents we can talk about made a lot of promises and then hand the problem along to their successor. There was a great joke that was told in the '76 election. Two farmers are going to vote, and they're asking each other who they're going to vote for. And one of them says, "I really don't know, because since President Roosevelt died, who's been fighting the Depression?" Well, yeah, we got into this period, and we had an assassination, and we had, well, a series of assassinations in the '60s and beyond. We had Vietnam. It was not explained to the American people. It was not defined. The mission was vague, unclear. Most Americans couldn't find it on a map. And then we followed that with Watergate. And, you know, the atmosphere was right for somebody like Donald Trump to shake it up. Why are all the wars the same? Why do they end the same way? Why don't we ever win any wars anymore? These generals show up at their budget hearings, you know, bedaddled with all their brass and their ribbons and all of that. And who's the last one who won a war? You were showing me going in, you were telling me about the great euphoria at the end of World War I and World War II, in Trafalgar Square, the Times Square in New York. Celebratory. Most people think we got very little out of these incurments. And why does it keep happening? Failure of intelligence, failure of common sense, failure of courage, bureaucratization that sweeps into almost every branch of government. There was a reason to shake things up a bit, and someone had to point that out. And I think that Donald Trump will be remembered more for his analysis than for his solutions, but he did ask the right questions.
There was this consensus in American politics that formed after 2001 between the Democrats and the Republicans. Some could call it neoconservatism, particularly on foreign policy, where you had this very hawkish foreign policy in Iraq and Afghanistan. So perhaps it was this political consensus that created an era, a sort of aura of, I don't want to say corruption, but certainly complacency. And as you say, maybe Donald Trump, we needed someone to shake that up. Do you agree with that?
We needed somebody to point this out. At the time, I mean, before Donald Trump was even talking about running for president, I remember talking to him, a group of friends. And I believed when the president said, and when Tony Blair said, and the French intelligence and the Israeli intelligence, the Italian all said that Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction that were aimed at us. Add to the mix that some people in the Bush administration thought that he had a role in 9/11, and I was on the 9/11 Commission staff, and we spent a lot of time looking at that. And what have we learned from Vietnam? Like, what is the goal here? William Buckley put this very good, that, I don't believe the president is a liar, and I believe all the intelligence showed what he said. All right, we took out Saddam Hussein, and we didn't find the weapons. Why were there 10 years more? Tell me again. We didn't find the weapons. Well, we have a perfect opportunity just to walk out. This is not a problem anymore. The French helped the Americans gain their independence, and they left. Then they bankrupted France, and they had their own revolution, he wrote. But they left. And they didn't take over New Jersey or Pennsylvania. They left. The British were out. It was the other superpower. That was France's goal. What are our goals now? And so then we decide the next step with Iraq was democracy, the forms of democracy. We're going to start voting. Remember all these people going to vote, and they had their index finger dipped in purple ink and it showed that they voted. What did they think they were voting about? What do they know about democracy? We did not do. And if you're going to do the job, you do it the way you did it in Europe, where you rebuild with an infrastructure. You build an economy, you create a trading partner, you try to find a way that there's mutual interdependence between us and them and they and their neighbors. But no, we're having elections. We couldn't tell one government after another after a while, and we again finally left.
But this was complete. Don't you think this was complete hubris? Sort of complete complacency, liberal complacency. You look at somewhere like Afghanistan. I mean, this is a clannish country. This people have family tribes. There is no history of democracy whatsoever in Afghanistan.
I quite agree with you.
We're completely
No, but there we had a reason. The Taliban was openly sheltering bin Laden. Nobody said bin Laden had nothing to do with 9/11, and he killed 3,000 Americans.
Of course, but
no
it's the
president's
nation
going to sit by, well, again, we can talk about democracy. No president's going to sit by and not act. And when we brought the Taliban down, was an opportunity, and that's a place I would say we don't need 500,000 troops. But we don't just get out and leave people at their own mercy. There were people who risked their lives to help us, and it's hurt our credibility down the line. And there's a difference between Bush in Iraq and Bush 1 in Iraq and Bush 2 in Iraq and Bush 2 in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was, even Obama called that was the good war. Remember all that? I don't think you go to war to build democracy at the end of an American rifle. You go to war to protect the American people. And if they're going to continue to erupt that way and continue to give shelter, which is some evidence that al-Qaeda is growing again, I keep reading, then you don't just leave like the left. You leave people on the ground, you use local populations to the extent that you can, and you decide your own terms of exit. You don't let the Taliban decide you're exiting and who you're taking. You don't leave the weaponry behind. Okay. So, I mean, yes, you have to take these things once at a time. I'm not aware that Bush talked about, that Trump talked much about Afghanistan. He talked about endless wars. Okay, well, we don't have endless wars anymore. He took credit for that the other night. We're not in Iraq. We're not in Afghanistan. And, okay. And he's the first president since Herbert Hoover not to send American troops into combat in other places. Is that a goal in itself? To some degree. Is it making us safer? Yet to be determined.
Now, Herbert Hoover is an interesting character, and he certainly is on the lower end of the list of your presidents, I believe.
If Herbert Hoover were not president of the United States, he would be on the list that anyone draw up of the 10 greatest Americans. He was the first one to become president. His entire experience was in the private sector. He was a mining engineer at a time when that was very important, the discovery of gold, and at the end of the 19th century in parts of China and Africa and other places. And then at the age of 40, he was the richest man in the world, almost one of them, probably the richest, if not one of them. He gave an entire life to philanthropy. He fed most of Europe. First cause was starving orphans in Belgium. In the World War, we weren't even in the war yet. John Maynard Keynes said he was one of the few people to come out of World War I with a higher reputation than he had when we went in. All the statesmen were disgraced. And they thought because he was an engineer and he believed in the power of science, the power of you don't like experts, talk to Herbert Hoover. He believed that expertise could solve all of our problems, science could solve all of our problems, and eventually the president would be reduced to the role of a clerk with all the experts running the department. Okay, so you say Herbert Hoover was really the closet father of populism, because it didn't work out very well. Yes, very bad president. Not a cold and egotistical president or a mean president. He really didn't understand that his world was falling apart. You said, where were you when you were 20? Well, when he was 20, we now call them robber barons, but all these people who prospered through laissez-faire capitalism built great companies. Carnegie, Mellon, Morgan, Edison, Westinghouse, keep going. And he thought they should run the world to some degree, and didn't quite work out that way. It doesn't mean that he was wrong in everything he tried. He tried very hard to fight the Depression. Couldn't understand that nothing he did worked.
Absolutely. Let's move on to another.
I've
got another interesting character. I'm aware we're running out of time, but Robert Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
He is the only
Yes.
rival to Joe Biden
Yes.
in terms of his candidacy
Yes.
for the Democratic nomination.
Yes.
The Kennedys, obviously famous clan in American politics. They've been in and out. They even had the presidency, obviously, under JFK. How significant is it that the Kennedys have broke with Joe Biden?
Well, I think it's very cynical. Well, I'll go back a bit. Sorry about the false start. It's not significant in itself. The Kennedy family has been called a clan more than a family, and they're famous for their loyalty. Almost all the family is supporting Joe Biden in that particular contest. Joe Kennedy Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr. is an anti-vaxxer. A lot of people think that he should have run in the Republican primary, where there are more votes in it than in the Democratic primary. All right. He has a magic name. With that name, I don't know, his name recognition is very, very high. However, when your mother writes a letter at the age of 90-something, whatever she is, people ask me about COVID. I tell them millions of Americans, and God knows how many in the world have died from it. Should you take the vaccine or not? I urge you all to talk to your private physician, family physician, and not listen to my son. And I speak for the rest of my family, or most of my family. When President Kennedy's daughter, Caroline, is now ambassador from the United States to Australia. Ted Kennedy's widow, Vicky, is now ambassador, I believe, to Austria. I always forget the country. And Joe Kennedy Jr., his son, Bobby Jr.'s nephew, is Biden's troubleshooter for Ireland. You see, there's more than a divided family. You have Bobby running on his own. But he's known. And his father is known for shaking up the Democratic primary at a time when Lyndon Johnson was Louis XIV. Le parti, c'est moi. L'estat, c'est moi.
Can you just talk a little bit about what happened there, where Johnson was kicked out?
I'll tell you. Robert Caro, you asked me about. All right.
Famous biographer.
Famous biographer of Robert Moses, called The Power Broker, but Lyndon Johnson, who even wielded more power. He has a multi-volume book about how Johnson became this master of the Senate and eventually presidency. And I talked to you about the party Joe Biden knew was boss-backed party. Lyndon Johnson had such power on everyone. They were afraid of him. He rewarded people very, very generously, and he punished with with the vengeance of Robespierre. And his domestic policies are very good. We talked about them earlier. Vietnam became this cancer growing on the presidency. I'm quoting John Dean in another parallel of Watergate. Hundreds of young men a week. And the Pentagon convinced the press to start the body counts. So as long as the week is ending and they killed 400 of ours and we killed 15,000 of theirs, we're winning. Okay? Some of them was calculated it and said we annihilated the population of North Vietnam like 20 times, if that's true. Finally, Gene McCarthy said, well, I can't get anything done. I can't get any of you to have serious votes and cut off the money to the war. I certainly can't get you to impeach him or to call him to question. They did have a series of hearings with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but all they did was weaken support for the war. It enabled them to stop it. So he said, quote, we're just going to have to take it to the country. Gene McCarthy never thought he would be president. Nobody thought he should be president. I'm not even sure Mrs. McCarthy thought that at the time. But he was a gallant soldier, and he said, I have one issue. I support Johnson, anything you're going to ask me about, but we're getting out of Vietnam. We're going to make the New Hampshire primary referendum. Still didn't win, but 42% in the New Hampshire primary against a stand-in to the sitting president of the United States was enough to create shocks in the political system. Well, that shock happened a week or two after McCarthy gets 42%. Bobby Kennedy announces that he's running for president. In the interim, I think Martin Luther King is killed around this time, or a little bit after that. And suddenly, Jens Johnson withdraws from the race. This pharaoh everybody was afraid of can lose 42% of the vote in the Democratic primary to a senator no one ever heard of. And he was packing up his bags and leaving. Well, if Bobby Jr. Becomes an instrument not for anti-vax, which is what he's running on. His dad ran against the war, but he's running on anti-vax. I'm not so sure there's that big a constituency of the Democratic Party. But if he says, I want this to be a protest vote, I'm asking all Democrats who are tired of our choices to vote for me. Whether I'm going to get nominated or not, I can open up the door. If he's a subtle candidate, which I doubt he'll be, and moves away from only that issue, but appeals to things that the Democratic Party has always stood for, other candidates could get into the race, thinking that someone's going to beat Joe in the end. Why can't it be me? If this guy can get 10, 15%, why can't I, the governor of Illinois, the governor of California, the governor of Pennsylvania, the governor of Michigan? The problem is they all may run, and they all run. It destroys the unity of the Democratic Party, and it strengthens whoever the Republican candidate is. But he can be an instrument. He's the only person who's announced against Joe Biden. I don't know how the Democratic rules are, or the television is going to do this. Normally you have to poll a certain percent to get into the debates. So
there are some polls that put him on 19, 20%.
Okay, well, if we're going into the debates and people in New Hampshire say they want to debate, they're telling the pollsters they're voting for Kennedy because they want to debate. They want to hear Biden submit it to the kind of questions you were asking me. It could make it very interesting. He's a very interesting candidate in that regard. I don't think he has any possibility of being president. I think he's running on some very dangerous issues.
I want to end the interview with one final question, and I hope viewers, I haven't teased them too much with this because we've talked about your book, so the leaders that we deserve and a few we don't. And this is where, again, you rank all of the presidents. And I just want you, and I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, to tell us about who are the best presidents, who are the worst presidents, and then we can wrap this thing up.
Let me say, the reason I wrote the book is because for years we read on President's Day or on George Washington's birthday, or whenever a president's doing something that we want or don't want him to do, a poll has come out, and a poll of historians, what are great presidents? And the list never changes. But they never had any reason why. Lincoln's always on the top. In those days, Warren G. Harding was always on the bottom. We'll say in recent days, there's lots of room on the bottom, and Harding's coming up because of our recent presidents. A lot of them are coming in under poor Warren Harding. But by the whole, never changed. And then you have the partisan bias that most liberal academics and liberal newspapers, who are the people who fill out the ballots, but then, again, they don't give you the criteria. So is it possible? I used to believe there was a certain thing as universal truth. That would be obvious if you take the facts where they lead, but I'm not sure about that anymore. But okay. So I said, all right, is there a way that I could come up with a list of people who are great presidents who I might not have voted for? I mean, is there a way you can do this, managing the job, as opposed to whether he was right about the thing I care the most about? And I came out with 6 criteria. And I'll run through them, really. One is character. I mean, that's not going to change. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, said a man's character is his fate. If you tried to lie to your parents and steal from the cookie jar and copy other people's papers when you were in lower grades, you're not going to become a very ethical man when you grow up, or woman when you grow up. Vision. Just talked about vision with Ronald Reagan. What do you want to do with the job? Why do you want to be president? We all know about the intrusion in your life, and they all age. You look at Nixon the day he took over, the day he left. You look at Johnson. Johnson must have aged 30 years. He was only president for 5. Maybe it did kill Roosevelt. I mean, he was fighting polio all his life. It did have some effect on his arteries and other. Maybe. Why do they kill to get it? Why do we never have an election with anybody? Nobody coming to play. Why do they all line up? It's a chance to make history. What do they want to do with it? Some didn't have a firm vision, and Reagan, as I said, could see around corners. And if I'm not going to change the world, why do I want that job? I have a better house in Beverly Hills with many more swimming pools, and they're all outside. Why do I want that? Character, and we have vision. So what's the vision for if you don't have the ability to carry it out? I call this the Carter problem. Now, Jimmy Carter may go down as one of the great humanitarians in the history of the world. His presidency was not a success. He may have been right. He may have been right on his energy self-sufficiency and other programs where he called for real sacrifice, but he couldn't get a lot through. And talk about opposition within his own party, Ted Kennedy ran a very fierce campaign against Jimmy Carter. I think pulled about 40% of the Democratic delegates. The convention came to the last moment of wire pulling, and he very much weakened Jimmy Carter for the election. Okay, so we have those three. And then how do they play out in policy areas? What are some issues that presidents cannot avoid? Well, they can't avoid the economy. We were just talking a little bit about interest rates and about recessions. They can't avoid foreign policy. Was the country stronger, weaker? Foreign policy, national security. And then the one that gets not only me, but all my readers and all who take up causes different presidents in trouble, whether they're going to expand or constrict liberty, America's founding mission. Talked about Mrs. Thatcher. They carry it around to more places, or did democracy shrink under their watch? Well, freedom from who? And freedom for who? Back to the standard debate. So Abraham Lincoln believed that black people should be free and they should all live what Mrs. Thatcher called the great American dream, and what have you. Jefferson Davis thought, Lincoln's opponent was the head of the Confederate States that had left the Union, that they were fighting for the right to oppress others. We're fighting for slavery. They called it freedom. Well, so by different people's lights, okay, but I think most people are on Lincoln's side and mine and yours. So, and then I gave every president a grade. I mean, I started this as a parlor game. I said, well, perfect parlor game, perfect way to end a cocktail party or a birthday party for somebody else. Go around the room. No one can prove me right. No one can prove me wrong. Pick your president and let the shuffleboard begin. And I think it's had an impact in only one area. I've never seen the list without categories before. I introduced categories into the debate. I forced the jurors to say, what kind of ballot are they filling out? And if you look at recent polls, I wrote the book, let's see, I think it came out in 98, maybe 2000, around there. Every C-SPAN poll, which is now expanded number of categories, every one of them, it's like a child brings home a report card. You may get a B in biology and a D in French and an A in composition. And all right, well, let's deal with it that way. And let's see where they all, and so some of the old greats have fallen from favor. Wilson, we can talk about. Jefferson, to some extent, we can talk about. Andrew Jackson, we can certainly talk about. He's been on the $20 bill for about a century. And he's now seen as the oppressor of not only African Americans, but more importantly, Native Americans. And he was a pro-slavery Union Democrat. Figure that one out sometime.
We British aren't fans of him.
No. Well, he did a number in the Battle of New Orleans. And, okay. He's fallen. Wilson's fallen. Jefferson's hanging on, but he's falling a few notches. Other people that were in the ash heap of pollsters for a very long time, U.S. Grant is now risen something like 20 notches. He used to be dead last, next to poor Mr. Harding. Some polls put him at 7, others put him at 20. Well, any of that's better than where he was. Why? Because these ratings tell us more about the evaluators than about the presidents. When civil rights was not considered important, when Jim Crow was tolerated by too much of the American society, Grant was the man trying to push Reconstruction, trying to push voting rights, sending troops to supervise Southern elections and all of that. Now that in the post-LBJ era, now that we think voting rights is important, people should not be discriminated against because of the color of their skin, et cetera, he's come up. Salva Coolidge is coming up. Sometimes there's a remedy that a physician will give you. Maybe we don't try anything. Things are going well. Coolidge's great line speaks to character again. It's very important, he wrote in his memoirs, to the President of the United States to realize he's not a great man. It's a very humbling experience. I get up and shave just like every other man in America, brush my teeth, I go to work, I come home, I read to my children, I go to bed. It's very important that people know the president is not a king and not inherit with divine power. So a lot of things have changed. Coolidge is coming up, not because of me, but the way people think about categories.
It's funny on that because Jimmy Carter obviously was more relaxed and saw himself very sort of man of the people. and he wore these jumpers and woolly things and had solar panels and everything else. And then you had Reagan, who saw himself as the president. You know, he always wore a suit. He didn't go around not wearing a suit. And he saw that image in a very different way. But anyway, listen, I think we should end it there, because I think that there's only one, way I can describe this interview, and it's really been a tour de force of American history and presidents. So thank you so much, Alvin, for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Steve.